Okay, so welcome everybody to episode 3 of Living in the Map. My guest this time is Jennifer Richey. So Jennifer is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Gravity Jack, a leading augmented reality firm based in Spokane, Washington, that creates technologies and experiences for augmented reality and helps clients achieve their goals with AR. Jen is a skydiver, rides sports bikes, and is a pro triathlete in addition to AR. So Jen, you are a very well-rounded human in that regard.
With a fabulous marketing guy, and forgot he wrote that. So there we go.
When you see those things, they beg questions. So you skydiving every day if you're a skydiver, or how frequently must one skydive to be a skydiver?
So I've got like 600, 700 jumps or so.
You are definitely one then, even if you haven't done it.
Yeah, it would have been more, but then I decided to have babies, and so I put that on hold. So it's been a while since I stopped jumping. Now my husband had surgery, so we don't skydive together anymore. Okay. But we did for quite some time.
Okay, and I'll have to ask too, because it did cross my mind. We've chatted before. I've asked if you'd ever seen good augmented reality on drones to like see AR from top down. I wonder if anybody has built a skydiving AR experience yet. I don't mean approximating what skydiving looks like in VR. I mean like, boom, here's weird stuff as I descend to the surface of the earth from thousands.
I don't know. We did, I can't remember if I talked to you about that. We actually did a 360, Skydive 360 VR app.
I didn't see that.
A while back. Yeah, so I jumped out of a plane and a helicopter with GoPro rig. And so we jumped out with the cameras and threw it into an app, a Skydive 360. And it was like pre-stitching. So it was before there was stitching software out there. So we actually stitched it ourselves. And yeah, I don't even know if it's still out there. It might be.
Well, that's pretty cool. So we'll get into a bunch of projects that you've worked on over time. And I'll just say to kind of set some context, the way that we met each other is we worked together on a project recently. So the Regrid team was trying to figure out how we could go about prototyping how land parcel boundaries and information look in AR. And I went asking around among some friends to find out like who would they recommend that we reach out to prototype an app. And I got just glowing recommendations to work with Gravity Jack. So we reached out to your team, and I'll chat about this a little bit more later, but just had a fantastic experience, commissioning your team to tap into our API to make it so that when you look through your camera, you can just see any property boundary and property information anywhere in the US. And you guys were awesome and snappy and just great to work with. So I want to say thank you for that. And we'll maybe get back to chatting about that a little bit, but yeah. Let's hear about you. Like you guys started Gravity Jack in 2009, right? Mm-hmm. Which is actually when we also started our business. So I know you guys have seen a whole lot of technological change. You've mm-hmm. seen business change, I'm sure. You've seen just like the ecosystem change. So like, kick us off here. Like, tell us about the Gravity Jack story and what got you into AR stuff.
Yeah, so myself and the other co-founders, we were did another company that did software on PC. So circa 2009, you got to remember the App Store came out in 2008. So mobile right. phones were, smartphones were just coming out. So we were at a traditional software company that got, acquired. And anyways, during that process, it was about 07, 08, there was talks of, augmented reality. And one of the co-founders telling me all about it. And I'm like, this is it. This is the thing we patent. This is the future of where it's going. We need to get ahead of the wave before it starts. So we did that, met with patent attorneys. We've got 6 issued US patents that a different team of attorneys are actively pursuing infringement right now. But that was early on in the space. I remember the first angel investor meeting I did in 2009, 2010. Anyways, it was early on and in a room full of hundreds of people. And, you kind of pulse your audience when you're talking to them. And it was like, hey, who all here has heard of augmented reality? Crickets. And I thought, oh no, who all here has a smartphone? Because I think it was 2010. It would have been 2010. Just yeah. a few hands went up, and I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting ride. Yeah. So, we got a call early on saying, oh, it's so neat. It's just not something that's going to happen in our lifetime. So it's been really wild ride. That same individual that said that later did come back and apologize that he was wrong. But it's been interesting. That beginning part was not just evangelizing the tech, but educating. Thankfully, now we're in a spot where 90% of the people actually know what AR is. They know what VR is. But early on, it was, this is what the technology does, and this is how you can use it. So it's been awesome.
and I remember those times very well because this is not, I've kind of like tuned out of the space for a number of years, but back in that 2003 to 2007 timeframe, I was very involved in online virtual worlds. So things like Second Life, like user created 3D worlds with its own economy and building tools and concepts of virtual land, and just being really
Yep.
interested in this metaverse space during this sort of like a prior metaverse hype cycle, I'll say.
Yeah.
This was like that period of time when Facebook was only for college students, or frankly, in there, it didn't even exist for a minute, right? There was no like
Yeah.
real-time social web. The smartphones weren't out yet, like you said. You know what I mean? And
It was like
even
MySpace time.
yeah,
Circle MySpace.
MySpace was forever, and Facebook or whatever wouldn't supplant it. And I remember getting very excited about a lot of these kind of ideas at the time too. And then I remember I had a moment when we started working on Regrid, when it was founded. It was called Loveland, where it was like one of my co-founders, Larry, and I talked to our co-founder Mary, and we were like, we're not doing any of that 3D stuff right now. It's just going to be 2D maps. You know what I mean? Where 2 dimensions are enough for anybody right now. And it's really just been over the last couple of years where I've been kind of pulling my head out to just really go like, something does feel very different right now. And I feel like, Mark Zuckerberg, to many people's minds, sort of like inexplicably rebranding his entire business to Meta with the business, with a mission to build the metaverse. I'm like, you could have pushed me out of a chair with a feather. I'm like, I thought that was, that like, it would be called something else or whatever. So maybe an interesting, like, I'd love to hear like just more about the projects that Gravity Jack is currently doing and seeing, and how they fit into this environment where there is like a renewed interest, I would say, in spatial computing, VR, AR. You've got big platforms making moves out there, trying to help build and own this future. What are you working on like right now, and how does Gravity Jack fit into that whole space?
There's a lot of layers to that question, right? So the metaverse at large could not agree more with what you were saying early on. Like even starting Gravity Jack, it was digital twin was a lot of how we were trying to relate it early on to people. Think digital real estate, digital signage. You can be walking around downtown Seattle or New York and you hold up your device and then you're actually getting signs to restaurants you didn't even know were there because they have, it's illegal to have signage out in some of these large cities. And so that translates over, and even like the Second Life. And then you have things that happen with COVID and everybody's stuck at home and they're more, receptive to digital initiatives. You've got trade shows. Trade shows is a big thing for us. We've always done trade shows. People do VR headsets at trade shows, or you can visualize products in augmented reality, which is fantastic. And then boom, no trade shows for 2 years. People are doing online trade shows, trying to get it through VR. So 2 things on that question. That's like a little background there. But with regards to the metaverse, what is Gravity Jack doing? We do custom tailored executions for our clients. So a lot of it is, what are the needs that we can fulfill? We're actually actively working on a fairly large meta project right now. That's a 6-month endeavor that it's taking a step into the metaverse where you've got avatars and gamification and multiple people. And I can't say much past that. But it's just getting community, because the thing about the metaverse, which gaming really laid good foundation for that, and good or bad depending on who you are, but it's that community where we're inside the metaverse together, be it walking around or exploring or gamification. But specifically with Gravity Jack, we're in process of doing a couple projects with clients in the NFT space. So what can you do with some of your NFTs? Debatably nothing. Some NFTs, people are like, what are you doing with them? But NFTs could play a big part in in the metaverse, where if I have this home that I purchased in the metaverse and then I can go furnish it with real art. Maybe it's NFTs of real art from a fine art gallery, which is something we're working on a client with. So private message me if you're interested. But that's one thing directly that we're doing with the metaverse. On top of that, one thing that I just like to encourage people in business and in personal is let us not forget that we live in the most creative, beautiful metaverse ever. We could never imagine the metaverse that we're presently living in. So people think of the metaverse as going VR, all in, taken away. But when we're augmenting our present metaverse, So when we're walking around, eventually with lightweight HMDs, head-mounted displays, and I can enhance the world around me, how much more impactful is that versus just going away and living in another world? I mean, teach their own. We all have different interests. But anytime someone says the metaverse, I can just like, don't forget this one. And then let's add to it here, which augmented reality does in many fashions.
It is still very much a squishy term. I was involved in a research project. God, I mean, this is a while ago now. This was like 2006, 7, called the Metaverse Roadmap Project, where we brought together different researchers and industry practitioners and vets, people who've made games, virtual world simulations. And like the best that we could define it was this model where there was virtual reality, which was like all of like the fantastical stuff that doesn't really exist. So like game spaces, just graphics and imagination. The augmented reality, where you're projecting graphics, can be fantastical, can be information, like on top of that real world. And then a mirror world component, which is like the digital twin stuff you were talking about, right? Where you're just really trying to make like the best digital map like ever, just like it's just the real world modeled in that kind of space. And then everything going on with just social networking and digital stuff is this sort of like life logging social network dimension. And even though the model has some definition to it, it just still means so much. And I, at that time, I did not premeditate this personally, like NFT digital ownership thing, which I confess I'm still trying to get my mind around, right? It's still very like an experimental phase on that. But when you're building these digital environments, you do start to feel the need for like, well, what is that aspect? What is that asset specifically? And who does own that, right? Who made that? Like, what is the what is the code for that? And I feel like that's a really, it is a space that bends people's minds because they associate it with an animated GIF or a JPEG or something like that. And maybe like if that's where your thought process ends on it, you've not really been immersed in a digital space where there's a lot more creativity involved in making it and it's natively digital. I don't know, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but it just, I underscore that because Gravity Jack works in such an interesting, rich digital space. You guys have a lot of opportunity in the canvas that you work in to do things, which is simple as just like look through your phone and here's something on top of the world, right? Which is how I feel like it can get pigeonholed.
What's interesting is we being on the front lines, and we've been on the front lines like since 2009. And by the front lines, what I mean is we're the ones creating the executions. We're hearing the needs from the clients in many, many, many different industries and taking it to, you know, so you have HMD, the hardware companies, they're doing what they think people want. They're doing what they think industries want. And it's a very interesting thing. How many times in any vertical, really, you think this is it, this is the piece that they're going to love about this app. And then the users themselves gravitate to this thing over here. And you're just in the backseat going like, what? That is debatably not very cool at all. So being on, you know, knowing what those needs are and the desires, and even we see what works and what doesn't work or has worked and has not worked. Like even in the NFT, there's some NFT stuff where I'm like, I'm sorry, it's odd to me saving a JPEG to a URL and paying money for it. Like what? And so like our client, we're solving that odd problem where you're actually creating a 3D model of what's thought of like a painting. We're creating a 3D model, so you're actually seeing the dimensions. You're actually seeing the depth, and if there's texture, you're seeing the texture, and you can put that 3D model in both the digital metaverse and VR and the augmented metaverse here by, you know, gosh, I can put it on my wall and I can see it here. So it is interesting. You're right. We get to see a lot of different aspects to the technologies.
What is so on that line? You know, I'm really curious to hear more about some of your favorite projects that you've worked on, and that right there is its own topic. So I'll kind of pin that, hearing about projects, but then also like hearing about your favorite AR and VR tools, because there's a number of platforms out there, right? There's a number of different interfaces or headsets. I personally, in my effort to just kind of catch up in the space, I bought an Oculus / MetaQuest 2, you know, recently. Like I'm catching up now, like, you know, wearing it in my living room going like, holy crap, this actually does feel pretty damn good. Like
it's kind of cool.
Cooling my brain, you know. We had our brother-in-law is visiting my wife Mary and I, and he put it on for the first time last night, and he was like a fish in water. He's in his early 20s, and it's just like I was going to try to explain it, and it was like, oh, this doesn't need any explanation. So yeah, curious to hear about like some favorite projects to give a flavor of like how you guys approach the space and the work that you do, and then also getting back around to like just your favorite gear and platforms to build for, because there are so many things happening.
Yeah. So the favorite projects, it's a little diverse for me. One was we did the first augmented reality toy project back in the day, early on. I can't even remember when. And it was this little stuffed animal that came with these cards. And so you download an app, and then you could aim your phone at the app, and then you could slingshot animals like these little things, and they would jump around. I'm doing this like because I'm on my, as if I'm on my phone, launching them.
Yeah.
And it was super cool because it was the first of its kind. B, it was awesome taking something physical and having a digital element to it as well, thinking outside of the box. And then third, because my daughter at the time, so Justice is this clothing store for like elementary, maybe early junior high that all the girls love. Well, they did back then. And we're in there shopping, and up on the TV pops this game that we actually developed in the store, like an advertising. And she's like, Mom. So yeah, she thought we were pretty cool at that moment when we popped up, because it was in all the stores. So that one was really cool from like a first groundbreaking kind of perspective. And then tugging on some heartstrings of mine for like, I really love real world applications that are solving problems, some that have ROIs, like direct ROIs. It's real impactful use cases. And we did something for the Department of Defense. It's no longer classified, so I can talk about it. And it was using a classifier. So it used computer vision to look at detonated IEDs. So bombs that had gone off, overseas or wherever, technicians, actually soldiers, would utilize on a mobile device, aim it at the components. So bomb parts are like, they look like little computer chips, and they almost have signatures with the way that they're made of, kind of the bad guys, whoever created them. Long story short, what we created got them actionable intel within a matter of hours. Whereas before, they would have to gather up the components, ship them to their forensics labs. They would analyze them and then get the data back in weeks, and sometimes up to like 8 to 10 weeks. So to be a part of something that actually, that's powerful, and CV is the step before augmented reality, right? A device has to know what it's looking at to then display the digital content. So that was probably my favorite computer vision project. And then we actually have a VR project out right now. And this one, I would say it's one of my favorite VRs that we've done. Again, it solves a problem. It's actually a product that's still for sale. It's called SimSafe, but it's fire extinguisher training. And we chose to go with the Vive Focus. So the Vive Focus, and we'll get to hardware in a second, is Oculus Quest 2's kind of counterpart. So it doesn't have to be tethered. You can like charge it with a USB port, and you use it in the middle of nowhere with no connectivity. But you put on the headset, and it takes you through the learning process of how to use a fire extinguisher. And then you're in there and you hit start and you're putting out a fire, and fire alarms are going. And so that was another really fun one to be a part of.
Yeah, so just real world simulation for training. And then your prior example, not everybody thinks about this as AR, but this is why the spaces are so conjoined, I think, is like computer vision to detect what's going on in the space, and then to augment it with the information about what is being seen that a human wouldn't know, but a database of lots of facts with the ability to pin them to patterns that it's seeing in the images can say. Again, part of what makes it such a rich and interesting space. And I couldn't agree more on like the utility thing. I think is like where people struggle sometimes, and I think that there are great examples of that, because I feel like the stereotype is sort of like fantasy frivolity. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Like I feel like things that actually don't feel good sort of fall somewhere in the middle, right? Like if it's not really teaching you anything, but it's also not really that fun, that's like the worst of all worlds. And you do sort of see things that fall in that gap. It's an easy gap to fall into, I think, right? It's like this will be helpful.
Oh yeah, I've had clients. Yeah, they come with things, and I'm like, okay. I'm also a big proponent of using using the right technology when you should. And then we've turned down deals where client comes to us with all these ideas, and you're like, do you really even need that technology for what you're trying to do here? Like the fire extinguisher started out, they wanted to do augmented reality, where you're putting on something, an AR headset, and you're looking over at a trash can. It detects a trash can and puts a fire in it. And it could have worked, but it would have been odd, just to be honest, trying to merge that digital fire, and then you have no handheld, you're attaching different types of equipment. Whereas when you're in VR, let's simulate this. Let's
Right.
take them there. Let's get them emotionally, because even if the fire extinguisher, like the alarm goes off, but you're in AR and I can still see like my coworker Susie sitting at our desk, like it's just kind of disconnected. You know what I mean? And so it's knowing which technology to use when.
And we did, in working with the Gravity Jack team was very helpful to us, because when we began work on the prototype of seeing property boundaries in augmented reality, it's very much a question we're trying to answer too, is like, how truly like useful and educational is this, and is this going to be? And I know like some of the lessons that kind of popped out to me from that, and I do think like after a lot of thought, we sort of like did qualify ourselves as like, yes, this could be useful. One, because like, and this is my own brand of nerdiness talking, right? Like, we live in a world of invisible property boundaries and subdivisions of space that have owners and land uses, which actually is meaningful. Those subdivisions are meaningful, even though we never really think about them, other than the extent of like, oh, that's somebody's private property, so I'm not going to walk around on it unless I want to get in trouble. But there really is no way to see these property boundaries in context. And it really was a magic moment to be able to have this app where through the viewfinder of the camera, all of a sudden I can like look at the space from the distance and see where this property begins and ends, see who the owner is, see what the land use is. And then as I travel around the space, really start to get this like in-person visual context of where the boundaries are, which does function differently from only looking at a 2D map. Like, I came to think of it as like the 2D map becomes like, it's a very intellectual.
Comes alive.
Right. And it comes alive like in the AR view in a way where I'm actually now kind of like examining the space and seeing like where that boundary falls in the actual context of like the trees and the fence posts and the things that are in the space. And the other thing that I took away, and this is sort of like a surprise learning, I think, is like the property boundary data set that we provide. I think a big part of like world size, like AR, is going to be geofencing of content.
Mm-hmm.
So like, even if you don't want to see the property lines, like the app being smart enough to know where to show you stuff and being smart enough where not to show you stuff. And I was kind of going down a research rabbit hole. Like, I found in the history of Pokemon Go by Niantic, they had a situation where they were actually sued by a number of homeowners over the fact that like the Pokemon game was spawning, I think they're called Pokestop, like they were spawning content like if not inside, then like right next to people's homes and in their backyards. And so you literally had people like snooping in windows and stuff like this, and then just a lot of complaints. And actually,
people, Pokemons were actually put in streets as well.
Oh, well, there you go, even more dangerous. All that. Like, it was crossing my mind in the app that you guys developed with us of like, man, even if you don't want to see the property lines, like this kind of data are as a kind of logic of saying like, app, do put stuff here, don't put stuff here, encourage someone to go here, don't encourage them to go here, is also something that property boundaries playing in AR can do, even if they're not like visible, and it's just the logic of them being. So it was just a great experience working with you guys to get that education.
So it's funny because doing that app for me falls under a functional use case big time. My mom was a real estate agent and a broker. My brother-in-law currently is a builder. And so when we first started chatting, I think it was like literally the day before or 2 days before we ever started talking, I was out with my brother-in-law. He's determining he's comparing different plots of land they're wanting to buy and put apartment complexes up. And he was struggling finding because of where he was choosing to build. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. Being able to visualize that. Also, side note, I know I said it to you, but your guys' API is beautiful for developers like us to tap into. It made it so much more enjoyable, because then it was like, oh, we don't have to worry about the data. It's solid. Now let's make it look good. But the functional use case of being able to visualize property lines, I mean, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like Snap, I know that that's ultimately going to be a big piece of what they're wanting to do with AR. So I have a feeling somewhere in here, Regrid and Snap are going to need to connect, because they're going to want to leverage that API that is solid to display content where they want it displayed. So yeah, it was an awesome project.
Of course, that'd be amazing. And of course, we'd love to work with you on any opportunities that we see in the space too, because there's so much to do. And especially when AR gets into like the more city and world scale applications, right? Because again, just because of like form factors and the demo nature on stuff, I still think it's often like it's either constrained to like the one room that you're in, or it's constrained to like only your phone, because obviously this is the way you do most things now, right? Like that's what we prototype. But getting into this question of like, you know, which kind of platforms and devices you find to create with the hardware, like we're not. I mean, I'll put it this way, right? Because again, I've been around the space for a minute, even though I tuned out of it. Like, I probably would have predicted more velocity in the development, you know, like a decade ago than was experienced like linearly. But now some of the devices, they just feel so close to good, and there's so much like investment happening in them. You've got your Facebook headsets and your Snap spectacles, and whenever Apple puts out the thing that people are talking about, right, like later this year or next year or whenever it is, it just knowing that like at some point before too long, there will be devices that you can just slip on that will either be not nerdy enough, or you'll be okay enough with being that nerd, right? Both things can, right? Where like you'll kind of be out there with them, and that'll be a very different kind of a world to be in, just with what you can get fed with things that you want to learn, or you know, be distracted by, whatever the case may be. So anyways, I'll shut up, but tell me, like, what are you seeing in the hardware space and stuff that you find attractive right now?